This crime is referred to as one that is eerily bizarre yet calculated, and it plunged two nations into shock and despair. The suspect climbed to the very top of Japan's most wanted list and even attempted to change his face to hide his true identity from the world. Today, we're going to look into the case of Tatsuya Ichihashi and his victim, Lindsay Hawker. This case is filled with bizarre and disturbing details, such as a body found with a potted plant, plastic surgery to evade tracking, and a years-long search operation that extended beyond Japan to the entire world just to catch one suspect. So, pull your chair a little closer, grab a warm cup of coffee, and get comfortable. From now on, we will tell the story of the Tatsuya Ichihashi case. Although today's story will eventually lead us to Japan, the starting point is a city in the UK called Coventry. Located deep inland in central England, this city is famous for its medieval cathedral, and sadly, it is also a place that suffered great destruction during World War II. However, it was steadily rebuilt over the following decades, growing into an industrial and technological city representing the UK. Coventry has an excellent geographical advantage, with easy access to both London and Birmingham, and being less than a 2-hour drive to most major cities in the UK, offering various conveniences to its residents. And one of the residents who lived there was Lindsay Hawker. Lindsay was born on December 30th, 1984. As the daughter of her father, Bill, and mother, Julia Hawker, she spent a happy childhood growing up with her two older sisters, Louise and Lisa. She attended King Henry VIII School in Coventry, England, and for university, she entered the University of Leeds to study biology. Lindsay, who had a strong passion for learning, achieved excellent grades in her studies, receiving a first-class honors degree in 2006. While she was serious about her future career, she was always a popular and beloved existence among her friends. Although she grew up in a bright and warm family and was successful academically, Lindsay strongly wanted something different to experience before starting her master's course. So, in mid-2006, she made a bold decision. She decided to postpone her studies for a year to travel and work. Her thought was, a year away from school will give me a new perspective on life. Thus, in October 2006, she applied to Nova, which was the world's largest private English conversation school at the time, and boarded a plane to Japan as soon as she received her acceptance notice. Nova Japan recruited adults from all over the world to teach English in Osaka and Tokyo, so acceptance itself was quite an honor. Lindsay became one of those few successful applicants. After arriving in Tokyo, she was placed in the Koiwa area of Edogawa Ward. Koiwa was 17 minutes to Akihabara and 22 minutes to Asakusa, a neighborhood overflowing with things to enjoy, from parks and food to shopping, temples, and bars. Lindsay had landed in one of the most attractive cities in the world, and she genuinely loved the place. However, as the city center rent became burdensome, she moved a little further east to Chiba Prefecture. The rent was much cheaper, and she became roommates with two other foreign teachers working at different English schools in the same apartment. The three quickly became best friends, and life in Tokyo passed quickly. Although she enjoyed her time away from home, Lindsay always missed her hometown. In the UK, she had her beloved family, countless friends, and a boyfriend. So she was a typical bird missing its nest, constantly keeping in touch via Facebook, Skype, and telephone. In March 2007, exactly 6 months after arriving in Tokyo, the fateful event began. That day, as usual, she finished her classes and went to retrieve her bicycle parked in front of Chiba Station. As she was unlocking it, a man approached from behind. When she turned her head, the man said, "You are my English teacher, aren't you?" Lindsay was flustered. He was clearly not her student. She awkwardly denied it, but the man kept following her. She hurriedly got on her bike and pedaled, but the man started running after walking. She couldn't shake him off in the complex alleys and intersections of Chiba. The man kept talking to her. "Where are you from? What school did you graduate from?" Lindsay ignored him till the end. Finally, she arrived in front of her apartment and parked her bicycle. The man, who caught up while panting, was Tatsuya Ichihashi. Despite his strange behavior, his proposal was surprisingly simple. Could you give me some private English lessons? We can do it at a cafe, and I will pay you quite generously per hour." Lindsay politely refused. Her Nova schedule was busy, so she didn't have time for private tutoring. Tatsuya seemed disappointed, but appeared to accept it. But then he made one more strange request. "I'm so thirsty from running. Could you give me a glass of water?" Lindsay hesitated, but eventually opened the door. Although he was a strange person, she had 2 roommates at home, and she also thought that if, by any chance, he appeared again, she should at least remember his face. While drinking water inside the apartment, Tatsuya made the offer again. This time, he specifically offered 3,500 yen per hour, about $32 at the time, emphasizing it's strictly business. It was hard for Lindsay to refuse. Living on just the Nova salary was tight, and this was money she could earn easily. Eventually, she accepted and made an appointment to meet at a nearby cafe. A few days later, just before leaving the apartment after thanking Lindsay, Tatsuya said he wanted to give her something last. He took a pen out of his back pocket, found a scrap of paper, and started scribbling something. The note he handed over a moment later contained a portrait of Lindsay he had just drawn, along with his name and mobile phone number written next to it. Tatsuya Ichihashi was 28 years old and from Ichikawa City, Chiba Prefecture. Born in Gifu Prefecture on January 5, 1979, he spent his childhood there before moving to Chiba. His father was a doctor working at a local hospital in Chiba, and his mother was also a dentist. From a young age, Tatsuya harbored the ambition to follow his father and become a doctor, but he had to give up his dream of becoming a medical student after repeatedly failing the entrance exams. Eventually, he graduated from the Department of Horticulture at Chiba University, 2005, but despite having quite decent grades, he did not look for a job at all. Instead, he lived on a monthly allowance of 100,000 yen, about $920 at the time, received from his parents. From here, the dark side of Tatsuya Ichihashi is revealed little by little. Although he had no criminal record, he had once been accused of robbery resulting in injury. It was an incident where he assaulted a woman on the street and tried to steal her bag, but it ended in a settlement when his father gave the female victim 1 million yen, about $10,000. He was described as a loner and was obsessed with physical fitness. He rode his bicycle more than 25 kilometers every day and never missed attending the nearby gym. With absolutely no will to get a job, rebellious, and living a secluded life, he had been surviving on a little over $900 a month until he was nearly 35. Editor's note: text says 35, context suggests nearing 30s. Nevertheless, after handing over the portrait and contact information, Tatsuya thanked her again for the glass of water and the lesson proposal, said, "See you in a few days," and went back. Time passed quickly, and it became Saturday, March 24, 2007. A few days earlier, Lindsay had contacted Tatsuya first, and the two promised to have their first private English lesson at a nearby cafe. CCTV at the cafe captured the scene of the two standing in line and talking to order drinks. Lindsay looked relatively comfortable, but it was clearly visible that she instinctively took a step or two back whenever Tatsuya came too close. The two sat and talked for a little over an hour, and by the end of the conversation, the relationship seemed to be progressing smoothly. However, somewhat awkwardly, Tatsuya realized he hadn't brought money and said this: "Don't worry, it's just half a mile down the road from here. How about we go to my house, get the money, and then start again?" Lindsay agreed, and the two got into a taxi. Since Lindsay hadn't brought her bicycle that day and had work in the afternoon, she politely asked the taxi driver to wait for a moment as soon as they arrived at Tatsuya's house. The driver agreed, and Lindsay followed Tatsuya into his apartment. When Lindsay didn't return after several minutes, the taxi driver thought it was a bit strange, but assumed plans might have changed and left the spot, thinking it was no big deal. He completely forgot about this incident. However, Lindsay was late for work that afternoon, and worse, she did not return to her own apartment. Her roommates, realizing she hadn't gone to work that day, began to worry about Lindsay and reported her missing to the police that night.
However, Saturday turned into Sunday, and Sunday turned into Monday. Lindsay's family and friends in the UK started worrying when her contact cut off, but it wasn't until Monday, when she had been absent from work for 2 consecutive days, that true panic began. The school contacted her parents to inform them of her 2 consecutive days of absence, and shortly after that, they contacted the police. Only then did the police treat the Lindsay missing person case seriously. More serious search efforts by the police began at Lindsay's home, and her roommates were the first interview subjects. Fortunately, they had a suspect in mind. They knew Lindsay had met a man at a cafe just before she went missing, and they remembered that she had left a portrait of that man in the apartment. This was their first clue. Around 5:40 p.m., 2 police officers were dispatched to Tatsuya's house. However, when they knocked on the door, no one answered. Fortunately, neighbors who were home allowed the officers to look down into Tatsuya's living room from their balconies. The lights were not on inside the house, but it looked like someone was hiding inside. And strangely, a movable bathtub had been moved from the bathroom to the balcony. The 2 officers instinctively called for backup. They were concerned that Lindsay might be held hostage inside, and within an hour, 7 additional officers arrived. 3 hours passed, and after 9 officers had gathered, the police were preparing to raid Tatsuya's house. At that moment, in a sudden instant, Tatsuya opened the front door wearing a backpack and rushed at the police. In that chaotic moment, the police tried to grab him, but they could only get a hold of his backpack. Tatsuya himself slipped through the police and escaped. Because it was difficult to catch up with Tatsuya or navigate through the very narrow and complex building corridors, he managed to get away, and the officers who did not have radio equipment eventually completely lost the man's trail.
In the middle of Tokyo, Tatsuya disappeared into the darkness. It looked as if he had suddenly evaporated without leaving even a trace. After he disappeared, a shocking fact was revealed while the police were searching his residence. Inside the house, the figure of the missing Lindsay Hawker could be confirmed, and she was found inside the movable bathtub that Tatsuya had moved to the balcony. The bathtub was filled with soil and sand, and from the outside, it was disguised to look like a regular flower pot. Inside, substances to accelerate decomposition were mixed in, and flower seeds were sprinkled on the surface. This appears to have been a measure to avoid external scrutiny. Lindsay's personal belongings were scattered throughout the scene, and circumstances showing that the situation was handled in a hurry were also revealed. Overall, these were important clues showing that Tatsuya had moved meticulously to hide his tracks. Following this shocking discovery, the investigation revealed one additional bizarre circumstance. There were traces that Tatsuya had mutilated parts of Lindsay's appearance, and several wigs were found in his apartment. Because of this, various speculations about his personal tendencies were raised by some at the time, but these were nothing more than facts mixed with unconfirmed assumptions. Nevertheless, these rumors spread quickly to the public, further increasing the uncertainty surrounding the case. The next morning, Tatsuya Ichihashi officially became a wanted target across Japan. His face was reported in various news media, and the police distributed wanted flyers throughout the city, asking for citizens' cooperation. The police interviewed people with potential information and conducted intensive searches centered on places where the suspect was likely to be. However, despite these extensive efforts, Tatsuya's whereabouts were not easily revealed. He seemed to have disappeared without a trace, and all sighting reports received over the next few weeks turned out to be false. The police explored various methods to secure the suspect and even released modified images in preparation for the possibility that he might disguise himself to hide his identity. However, Tatsuya was still very adept at hiding his whereabouts, and his disappearance continued from weeks to months and eventually to more than a year. During this process, Lindsay's family suffered deep frustration. Not only the grief of losing their daughter, but the fact that the person responsible for the case had still not been caught was a great psychological burden to them. Also, the family felt that the Japanese police investigation was not sufficiently fast or systematic and complained of increasing frustration. Eventually, Lindsay's parents decided to visit Japan themselves to raise awareness of the case. They tried to find every possible method and moved actively, talking to local residents and asking for help. Her father, Bill, even met Japanese Yakuza members at a bar, handed them 2 bottles of whiskey as a gift, and asked for help. As time passed, the Japanese police soon came under public scrutiny. How could 9 police officers lose 1 man? Why did it take a month to identify a key witness? And were they aware that the image on the wanted flyer they used was 7 years before the incident occurred? The police and the Hawker family began to argue with each other, and before long, the British and Japanese media joined this debate. While all this was happening, Tatsuya was still out there. During his fugitive period, he actually went through almost every region of Japan, from Aomori, one of the northernmost cities on the Japanese mainland, to the southern island of Okinawa. Tatsuya remained undetected. He sometimes lived in concrete bunkers on remote islands avoiding detection throughout 2008, a year after Lindsay died, and throughout 2009. Tatsuya was hiding in Osaka, 250 miles west of Tokyo. Osaka is Honshu's main trade center and a huge port city, famous for modern architecture, nightlife, and hearty street food. During this period, Tatsuya stayed mainly in internet cafes and worked at construction sites to make a living. The money he saved was put into plastic surgery to change his appearance and evade the law. In fact, since being wanted, he had been changing his appearance through self-harm. He cut off his moles, used scissors to cut off part of his lower lip, and finally tried to change the shape of his nose by sewing it with thread. In the summer of 2009, the police were desperate to find Tatsuya. Accordingly, the National Police Agency raised the bounty for decisive information leading to his arrest from 1 million yen to 10 million yen. Also, assuming that Tatsuya had undergone plastic surgery to change his appearance, they issued a new alert that people should not lower their guard regarding his changed appearance. And this strategy worked. In October 2009, a plastic surgeon in Nagoya reported to the police that he seemed to have just performed a procedure on Tatsuya. Tatsuya foolishly agreed to have his before and after photos taken, and those photos were shared with the police and ultimately the world.
Tatsuya was panicked. He knew that the new photos released by the police revealed his identity. Indeed, the photos were so effective that one of his co-workers at the Osaka construction site recognized him. Tatsuya knew he had to leave Osaka immediately and hide quickly. His plan, as it had been in several previous crises, was to flee to Okinawa and take refuge in one of the abandoned concrete bunkers on remote islands. On November 10, 2009, he secretly headed to the Osaka ferry terminal. He thought that if he hid for 3 nights on a slow ferry bound for Takanawa, he would be able to evade the judgment of the law in a much safer place. However, before he could even board the ship, Tatsuya's luck finally ran out. An employee at that very port recognized his face and informed security that this person was likely Ichihashi, and their guess was correct. Just a few moments later, Tatsuya faced several police officers. When they asked for his name, he knew the situation was over. He told them, "That's right, I am Tatsuya Ichihashi. The game is over." After that, he was officially arrested by the police. He was initially charged with abandonment of a corpse, and subsequently 2 additional arrest warrants were issued for sexual violence and causing death. It took 8 months for him to officially stand trial. On July 4, 2011, his trial began, and as the first hearing was expected not to take long, much attention was focused on what punishment the Japanese judicial system would hand down to Tatsuya. Although the death penalty exists in Japan, it is not often handed down to murderers who committed a single crime. However, Tatsuya was a widely known figure in the media, and many people demanded the death penalty. At the trial, Tatsuya admitted that he lured Lindsay to his apartment, committed sexual violence, and then, fearing that a neighbor might hear her screams and report to the police, applied pressure to her neck area, causing her death. On July 21, 2011, Tatsuya Ichihashi was officially sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Lindsay Hawker. Lindsay's family demanded the death penalty for Tatsuya, but the court ruled that the death penalty was inappropriate because he had no prior criminal record and was 32 years old at the time, meaning there was a possibility of rehabilitation. This trial did not end without more pain and loss. Lindsay's family not only had to recall her final moments again, but also had to see photos of Lindsay's body anew, which left a deep scar on them. After the verdict was handed down to Tatsuya, Lindsay's parents spoke to the state media. Words of the victim's family. "We have waited a long time for today. We waited 4.5 years for justice for Lindsay. Lindsay loved Japan, but you did not let her down. Ichihashi, you took away the most precious thing, her very life. Because of you, our entire existence was destroyed, and you stole countless memories from us." The sentence of life imprisonment for Tatsuya was welcomed by most Japanese citizens, and Tatsuya himself accepted his fate. Just before the trial, Tatsuya actually wrote and published a book confessing his guilt of harming Lindsay and ending her life. His autobiography detailed where he lived as a fugitive for 2.5 years and the actions he took to avoid detection. The book was titled "Until I Was Arrested," and all royalties and profits were scheduled to be donated to Lindsay's family. This book sold more than 100,000 copies worldwide. However, Lindsay's family refused the offer, and despite Tatsuya's bizarre attempt at charity, nothing could bring back their daughter. Lindsay was a loved, successful, brilliant, and irreplaceable person. She was having a precious experience abroad and doing good work teaching valuable new skills to others. And in the end, her very kindness was exploited by an indifferent and bizarre man. She will be remembered by her parents, sisters,